It's the show where Hawaii's newsmakers come to talk and to take your questions live. From the nation's capital to Honolulu Hale, from the state legislature to the fifth floor. We bring the experts to you and ask them what you want to know. Spotlight Hawaii with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
Aloha and good morning. Thanks for tuning in on this Monday morning and starting your week off with us. I'm Ryan Kalei-Suji, joined by Yunji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii, of course, on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. This morning, we're going to be focusing in on Red Hill and the efforts that are currently underway to defuel the facility and someone who has been tasked to oversee this monumental task.
Yeah, this morning joining us now is John Wade. He is the Vice Admiral with the United States Navy, who has been the commander of Joint Task Force Red Hill since September of 2022. Sir, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Well, Yunji and Ryan, it's great to see you, and thanks for having me back.
We've got a lot of questions for you this morning. Of course, the public very interested to know the updates on the defueling process. Just last week, the health department did conditionally approve the Red Hill defueling plan. Can you tell us what that means to the process and sort of big picture where we are in this process?
Sure, thank you. So first of all, in mid-May, Joint Task Force on behalf the Department of Defense submitted an updated defueling plan, and it highlighted an accelerated timeline that was conditions-based so that we can remove the fuel earlier starting in mid-October. We, in the last week, have received conditional approval by both the federal and state regulators, so the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and the Hawaii Department of Health, or the DOH. This is a significant milestone. It's significant because it highlights the collaboration and coordination with the regulators who hold us to a standard by federal and state statutes. But then it also reflects the iterative planning that my team and I, and along with multiple stakeholders, to execute this both safely and expeditiously. So we still have a lot more work to do, but the needle is moving in the right direction.
If you can update us now on what is actually happening in this moment, what are some of the things that are currently underway? We know that there was a list of repairs that needed to be done even before this defueling could begin. Where are you at specifically right now with some of the improvements or some of the things that you folks are working on?
Sure. So there's many activities going on in parallel. We're just about complete with the mandatory repairs, enhancements, and modifications that were required in the state emergency order. There were 253 repairs. We have completed 252. The last repair will be complete by the end of the month. We're just waiting for a part. Meanwhile, we're working with the Department of Health and the EPA to conduct quality validation. That means that each of those repairs, enhancements, and modifications are done correctly. And the emergency order mandated that a third-party firm, not part of Department of Defense, to review everything that we have done through our contractors and then through our quality assurance program, and then submit them to the regulators for their review. So we're working our way through that, and DOH and EPA is going through the jobs, and they're going to give us conditional approvals or questions, so that's ongoing. Meanwhile,
okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Meanwhile, there's a lot going on. Meanwhile, we're working each element within the defueling plan, which has an associated, what we call a concept of operation, which has detailed procedures, and we have to go through the regulators to get those approved. So we're iterating with those daily. And then meanwhile, we're training very, very hard to ensure that we can conduct those procedures accurately. And then we're also working through a response if there were a spill or a fire. We obviously don't want that, but we need to be prepared. So all this activity is ongoing in parallel as we set conditions for mid-October.
So mid-October is when we expect the fuel to actually start flowing through the pumps or through the pipes and getting out of there. But when you talked about that, truncated timeline, why do you think, what do you attribute that to? How are you able to shave off a significant amount of time? What is going right?
So I committed when I took this job that we would build a schedule based on all the requirements, and then we would work in collaboration with the regulators to look for adjacencies, dependencies, efficiencies to see if we can shorten that timeline and commence defueling earlier. We also committed to working with the contractors that were supporting us and to see if there were efficiencies within the facility itself to sequence the jobs more effectively to see if we can buy back some time. And we've been able to do that. We've been able to shorten the timeline about 5 months. Now, that doesn't mean that we've taken shortcuts. We've been working hand in hand with the regulators. We're taking feedback from industry. We're looking at the lessons learned from all the investigations and the findings. And we're also taking the feedback from the engineers, from the regulatory agencies to fine tune our procedures to ensure that we're ready to go.
As you lead up to this actually defueling and getting that fuel out of these tankers, is there any sort of preliminary process where you're actually testing what that looks like before actually implementing these plans? Is there a test run? We're a few days away from the rail starting, and they had to undergo a significant amount of safety checks before even beginning this operation. Is anything like that put in place where you folks are going through a testing cycle of this before even actually doing this, noting that there could be some unforeseen circumstances that may pop up?
Yes, we've got a robust testing plan that is part of the quality validation program that I highlighted with the repairs, enhancements, and modifications. We also have a testing plan for the systems that weren't touched. And so the whole goal is to reduce risk to the greatest extent possible. We have an integrated master schedule. That schedule has all the key milestones listed out by dates and who's responsible and accountable for what. So we're going through that methodically. One of the things, though, that is very, very important, I highlighted that the defueling supplement plan, the update, is conditions-based. One of the unknowns is that we have to reintroduce fuel into the pipelines to ensure that there's no air so that the fuel will flow smoothly. Now, we've been going through these repairs for 9-10 months. And so there may be some unexpected repairs that we need to take care of as we prepare for the defueling. So we've got about 6 weeks in our schedule to adjust for that. So it's important that we have this testing plan. We're going through every detail in coordination with the regulators, and that's part of their conditional approval process.
We know that this is an enormous system, and one of the things that there have been a lot of questions about is surveillance and cameras. When this incident first happened, there was a question about cameras that were not operational, and a lot of folks were very upset about that. There has been some talk that they may not be able to get those up and running in time to sort of coordinate and match with the actual defueling. Where do you stand on cameras? And in lieu of cameras, are you going to have, people, individuals on the ground actually watching, physically, or how are you going to manage the surveillance piece of the defueling process?
Yeah, I appreciate this question. We've had a number of town halls and open houses here recently, and this topic has come up quite a bit with interested community members. This issue came to light with the AFFF mishap and investigation. There are about 40 cameras that are in the facility. They were installed over 20 years ago. When I learned of the cameras locations in and around the AFFF spill, one camera was working, another wasn't. And that frustrated and angered many in the community. So I asked for a complete review of the entire system. And what we determined is that these cameras are antiquated. Many are beyond their service life and are not working, and several of them are degraded. So we then went to the regulators, and there are no mandatory requirements for these cameras to be there, but we understand the strategic importance to monitor effectively, provide surveillance, and also to historically document. So what we have done and committed to do is to install a series of temporary cameras They will be installed by the end of August, where we reintroduce fuel into the system. On top of that, though, we will have a number of personnel that will also be roving security, that will also have eyeballs on the system to ensure that we're tracking everything. It is very important that we do this, and so we're committed to do so.
And with those images that are being documented through this process, I'm wondering if you can also speak to that availability for the public to see that. There have been requests by the department, by the Board of Water Supply, I should say, and others who have requested access to see some of these footages, and it has taken some time to get. If you can speak to the level of transparency that you folks are willing to share some of the footage, and just the overall, if you can update us on just the interaction that you're having with certain representatives from the Board of Water Supply and government officials. How often are you regularly meeting with them and updating them on your process?
Okay, there's a lot there. So, but I appreciate the question, because those questions are important. So you have to understand there are security concerns for a massive facility like this that is holding 104 million gallons. So we have to be mindful of that. But we will be as transparent as possible. If you look at our website, or if you download our app, we're pushing pictures and videos of the facility. We'll continue to do that. We're sharing that with the media so they can put it out for the community so they can see and consume. That's an important part of transparency. As you know, we are committed to work with the regulators. We have to through statute. But we're also working very, very closely with the Board of Water Supply. In fact, I had a meeting with Mr. Lau and his team on Friday with Admiral Barnett, Navy Region Hawaii, and also Admiral Killian, who is Naval Facilities Engineering Systems Command, because the three of us really work together. We're tied together because defueling sets the condition for closure, and then there's a robust environmental remediation effort that's ongoing and will continue for many, many, many years. So Mr. Lau is obviously interested, and so we keep him informed and updated because it's the right thing to do.
I'm interested to know, when this was when the defueling was first suggested, there was a lot of pushback initially because this is such an important resource for the Navy strategically and for the broader Indo-Pacific Command. And so I'm curious to know, now that this facility will be shut down, where will the fuel go, and how will the Navy kind of work around no longer having this facility?
Now, I appreciate the question. When the Secretary of Defense made the decision of March of 22 to defuel and to close, he tasked the Joint Force, or U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and Defense Logistics Agency to determine where the fuel should go so that we can continue our efforts to deter in the region and also to be prepared if there were a contingency or a crisis. So the final decision has not been made on where the fuel will go. That is dependent on the National Environmental Policy Act that we are ongoing or actively engaged, which will be complete by the 31st of August. And the Department of Defense must submit the locations to Congress here before we start defueling. But the locations are many that it could go. A number of fuel depot storages on the West Coast. A portion of the fuel may go to the old Campbell complex near Kapolei, and then also fuel movement to other countries, Australia, Singapore, Philippines, Japan, and also proposed for many millions of gallons to be kept at sea. Honestly, this makes our country more resilient because now we have fuel in many, many more locations, less of a target if we were ever to be in any type of crisis or conflict. And so the fuel would then be part of the posture to continue our operations.
I want to get back to just the defueling plan and the process in and of itself. You said that there will still be between 100 and 400,000 gallons of fuel remaining once the process is done. And there was been some talk and some questions about potential sludge that may be at the bottom, some residue at the bottom of these tankers. What is the plan for and the action plan for removing that portion of the fuel tankers?
Yeah, I appreciate this question. This too comes up quite a bit in our engagements with the community. So look, the defueling of Red Hill is a very complex process, and this supplement discusses and shows how and the timeline of how we're going to gravity drain what we can out of the fuel lines. When the gravity draining is complete, there will be what we estimate between 100 and 400,000 gallons remaining in the facility. But let me be clear, the Department of Defense is going to remove every single drop. It's just that for this phase, we're only covering what we can get out with gravity defueling. We are working very closely with the Navy right now in conducting a detailed survey and analysis of every valve, every bend, every inch of the facility to determine where this residual fuel will be. And then in a subsequent supplement, we will get after the remainder of the fuel. You have to understand, if you have a sink in your kitchen and you have a plumber that's going to come by and do some work and they remove the piping from underneath, there's that little bend and there's usually water or fluid in there. There's 3.5 miles of pipeline, numerous bends, valves, so that we're going to have to get after it. But when we do, it's going to be methodical, deliberate. We still must adhere to standards. And the good news is that we've actually been doing these procedures over the last 9 months. As we've been conducting repairs, we've gone in with the mindset that even though we conducted unpacking, that there may be fuel everywhere that we're doing these repairs. And we have found pockets of residual fuel. And we've worked with the contractors with primary and secondary containment. We've worked with the regulators to ensure we're following all environmental laws, and we've been deliberate in that, and we will just continue, but we have to have the plan, we have to submit it. In fact, the EPA, in their conditional approval, have mandated that we need to provide the new supplement by the end of this December. My hope is that we can get that submitted earlier.
So when we talk about the timeline, you start that gravity draining in October. The new timeline is January for it to be completed, if that's correct. But that does not include this residual fuel. Is that right?
That's correct. So by this January, according to the plan that we have here, we will have removed 99.85% of the fuel, so approximately 104 million gallons. And then we will then, from January forward, depending on what we come up with this additional supplement, we'll then methodically go through and remove every last drop of the facility. But we have to also layer in, integrate, and synchronize all the closure activities that will be starting with the Navy. They have also made the decision to start removing the pipeline, which is a very important decision, as you know. So we have to work that. And then the facility, even though it's a very large facility, it's not a lot of space. So we have to deconflict. And then we have to ensure that we've got the right power, we've got water, all the subsystems that will facilitate this work. So it has to be type of a symphony where we have to make sure that the instruments are all coming in at the right note, the right time, the right speed and tempo. So my commitment working with the Navy is to keep the community fully informed as we go through this detailed mission planning that lies ahead.
I'm assuming because you are ahead of schedule with the initial timeline with some of the repairs and fixes that needed to happen before this defueling begins. I imagine that things have gone relatively well and that there hasn't been much setback. But has there been any obstacles or any unforeseen circumstances that have come up or things that you have noticed during this process of repairs that maybe you did not anticipate, or have things relatively gone so far according to plan?
Well, to just be fully transparent, and it's a fair question, I would tell you that the AFFF mishap in November was a really big setback. Although that maintenance action was not something that the JTF was responsible for, it certainly had an impact. And within 1 hour, I was up at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and we were on the phone with the Secretary of Defense, and we basically said, we've got to take ownership of this issue. It's the right thing to do, and quite honestly, what the community would expect and our elected officials would expect. So we started that investigation immediately, and it culled some significant lessons learned that we're applying to defueling. But my recommendations in the endorsement also applied to the larger joint force throughout the Indo-Pacific, not just Hawaii. And the Secretary of Defense has also pushed those lessons out to the entire force globally, because we work with hazardous materials everywhere. In a sense, the controls that have been implemented following that mishap have, I think, helped us reduce risk even further at the Red Hill facility. We now have, we had soldiers from 25th ID, but now we've got airmen from the Hawaii Air National Guard at every entry control point, making sure that we know exactly who's going in the facility and who leaves. We've added over 100 people to my team, close to 50% an increase, to have military escorts with every contractor. We've installed what I call a robust risk mitigation plan where every activity within the facility has to be synchronized in a integrated production schedule that is briefed to me and approved. And if there are activities that are at higher risk, and what that means is that if it could injure somebody or damage equipment, or at even a higher threshold where there's a potential for a hazardous material to be released to the environment, those have individual briefs that are approved either by me or by Admiral Aquilino, dependent on the level of risk. So these are important things that we've done to ensure or reduce risk to the greatest extent possible from not having another mishap. Now, as we continue our training, we continue to learn and provide high velocity learning into our procedures. So, our goal here is to move as safely but expeditiously as possible to remove the threat that sits above the aquifer.
I know that you don't want to get ahead of yourself in the secondary report what you were talking about when it comes to that 100 to 400,000 gallons. But when we look at that timeline, do you have an estimate as to when you think that work will be completed? Because I think for many people in the community, until, as you say, every last drop is gone, they won't really feel that this is really completed.
No, it's a fair point. In fact, I was in Washington, D.C. last week briefing the Office of the Secretary of Defense, because they are as much, concerned about this as the community. We've got to get that fuel out, but we've got to do it deliberately and methodically, and we have to sequence it right and, choreograph it with everything else that we have going on in the facility. Again, we're working in partnership with industry, with the Navy, and we will come through this plan. I think we're going to have to prioritize what is above the aquifer, and there's a way to do that, and we're working that in partnership with all the stakeholders. But again, it would be premature for me to give a timeline because the analysis is still ongoing.
And just for reassurance for some of the viewers, and I just want to bring in a question or comment here, that the task force should remain in place till the last drop is out and it's shut down forever. What is the commitment here to be in Hawaii? What is the timeline for your exit or the task force exit in this process to ensure and to provide some sort of comfort to residents who recognize the need for this task force at this time?
Well, I appreciate that feedback, and I'm certainly humbled, and my team and I are absolutely committed here to the mission. But the actual timelines for the transition between the JTF and the Navy will be a Secretary of Defense decision. That's beyond me right now. My focus right now is to set the conditions for the gravity defueling, and then to work in partnership with the Navy and do the analysis on what's next to get after the remainder of the residual fuel and to do it safely. But I will tell you this is the first job I've had in over 33 years serving in our Navy where I didn't have what's called a projected end date of my orders. They're indefinite right now, and I'm fully committed to do this mission and do it right.
I want to talk a little bit about community trust. You referenced the spill, the PFAS spill that happened in November, and just what a blow that was, of course, environmentally, but also to the community's trust of what happens at the facility and beyond. What are you doing to engage the community? Ryan had asked you about meetings with public officials. I know that you did say that you met with BWS Chief Engineer Ernie Lau just last week, but how are you working to rebuild that public trust and gain the confidence of the community?
I appreciate this question. Look, I understand, and I've said this before, the community's frustration, anger, disappointment that's been years in the making. And I'm committed to listen and to hear the feedback from the community. And even though my mission is directly focused on defueling, I'm connected with every other facet of the Red Hill problem set. So whether it's closure, environmental remediation, clean water, or medical, and I'm committed to pass that feedback on. So I also acknowledge that to rebuild trust, words will not in any way be satisfactory. It's concrete actions. And so to me, what I can do to contribute to public trust is to removing the fuel without incident and hopefully doing it faster than the original timeline. But also there's communication requirements. So we have committed ourselves to be out there with the public. In the last 4 months, we've had 6 either town hall or open houses where we can communicate and talk with the public. We are very, very active in briefings at the federal and state and local level. We continuously update the congressional delegation in DC. We are going to brief the governor another time here in early July. We'll meet with his water committee. We have testified at the state capitol, at the Red Hill Special Committee. We briefed at the Department of Land and Natural Resources. We've just conducted the Fuel Tank Advisory Committee. But we also have our website. We just, in the last 3 weeks, have unveiled our app, mobile app, which is downloadable that, for access for the community. We have our information sharing forum, which is a group of 15 concerned community members or elected officials that are functional, technical, or cultural experts. And they've given us significant feedback on how to communicate better. An example will be if you go to our app or the website, there are many videos that are there that my team has built to take this complex evolution and make it more simple and understandable. We also put together a dashboard that has succinct information in graphical form so the community can track our progress. So we're doing everything possible that we can to communicate. And again, I will listen to everybody. Even if someone has concerns or they're angry, it's important because the only way that we can heal and move forward is to listen, compassionate, acknowledgement, but also concrete actions that we need to do to remove this threat and to ensure that the aquifer is clean, not only for today, but future generations, and then to take care of the long-term medical issues that many are experiencing.
We have that QR code that's listed right in the corner of your screen, and that will actually take you to that app that you're talking about. We only have a few minutes left here, but wanted to provide you an opportunity for just a closing statement and closing thoughts. Again, there's still a lot of concern about what's happening there, obviously by community members. And as this defueling actually begins, there is some hesitancy about people who say how safe this process is. Your message this morning to area residents and those watching that may still have some trepidation about this process.
Yeah, Ryan, I appreciate the question. I would just say to the community that I understand your concerns, but I want you also to know that I was here in 21. My wife and I live on Joint Base Pearl Harbor. We were here during the spill and the water crisis. I have 3 adult children. They all came back during those holidays. We drank the water. We cooked the water. We bathed with the water. We were as confused as many others. And there are many, many on my team that went through this too. That drives us every day. And our commitment is to work aggressively to reduce risk to the greatest extent possible, work with all stakeholders so that we can remove the threat that, again, that is here now, that it threatens us and the environment today, but future generations. While we're doing this, I am absolutely committed to be transparent. Please give us continued feedback. I ask you to download that app. It has all the things that we're doing. We're just pushing information, and it'll come right to your phone. And I just want you to know that this is an important mission for our team. We understand the importance for you, the community, our military families, our elected officials. We just got to get after it.
Vice Admiral John Wade, the commander of the Joint Task Force Red Hill since September of 2022. We thank you for your time this morning and all of the updates. We really appreciate the information.
Yunji, Ryan, thank you so much. Thanks for your interest, and I look forward to coming back at some point in the near future.
Aloha, thanks so much.
Great to hear from him. Very interesting, timely interview, because we did hear about just last week the health department and the EPA giving that conditional approval to the Red Hill defueling plan. He really laid out some specifics, also following up on that this morning. In October is when they hope to actually start the process. January of 2024 is when they hope to have the vast majority of that fuel taken out of the facility. Very interesting, Ryan. I think he said there were 253 necessary repairs, and they have done all but one. He says they're just waiting for a part, and then they can really get this started.
Yeah, and you also heard from him about just not only these repairs, but they are also going through a testing of the actual defueling to make sure that they are following all the safety protocol and the requirements that the EPA and other regulators have put into place once this process actually begins, and really making sure that it is as seamless as possible. Also noting that while the defueling may be done in January, there still will be work to be done with that some 100 to 400,000 additional gallons of sludge or residue that may be remaining, that they are continuing to look for ways to clean up that effort. But this, again, will be an ongoing plan. But you heard from him, especially in the end, their commitment to transparency. He talked about setting up additional cameras that will help to document this process, and his communication efforts to be in touch with Board of Water Supply leaders, state stakeholders, as well as our federal delegation.
Yeah, and interesting on that camera question, he did note that they are not legally required to have that system up and running, and it's a 20-year-old system that is not fully functional, and so they are replacing a number of those cameras. They also plan to have boots on the ground, if you will, have roving security to actually be watching this process as it unfolds. What of that video will be shared in real time? Let's not forget that this is a strategic facility and something that they can't necessarily just broadcast on the internet, but they do plan to have that surveillance system in place, really trying to make sure that if anything begins to go wrong, that they can stop it right away. The reason for that 100 to 400,000 gallons that will be left behind is really that this is a gravitational system, and so it's very easy, if you will, not easy, but they're relying on gravity to get the vast majority of the fuel out. But there is still this engineering problem of how to get that last bit out. He says the report for the plan for that is due in December. He can't share a full timeline of when that will be out because they're really still trying to figure that out. But very interesting also on that question of trust, and he's really saying that the proof is in the pudding, that there is a symphony of things, I like that analogy, that needs to happen all at once for this to go right. And as that happens, he thinks that the trust is rebuilt that way.
Yeah, and also noting that there are a number of robust level of support that has been added to this task force in order to help in this process with all these areas, including security, to other eyes on each of these throughout each of the steps of this process. He also noted that some of the fuel, which was a question that many had, is where does this fuel go and how is the military going to use this? He spoke briefly about the diversity of locations that the fuel could actually be. So it's not necessarily in one location, but through strategic points that the military will be identifying throughout the Pacific, noting that it is still an important area where they need to have this type of supply available, but that it will be spread out throughout the region rather than concentrated at a facility like Red Hill. So a lot of information. Again, he provided that link to the app, which sounds like they do have a lot of information that is coming out that way. So we encourage you, if you miss any portion of this interview, to go back and watch it on the platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, download it as a podcast, or watch it later this evening on Channel 50 for more information, or download the app as the Admiral suggested. On Wednesday, we'll be switching gears and heading back to the Hawaii State Capitol.
That's right. We're catching up with Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke. She has been tasked with the preschool readiness project. They're hoping to open a number of preschools to get 3- and 4-year-olds access to education throughout our state. There are 11 classrooms that are opening ahead of schedule starting this August. So where do they stand on the Ready Keiki program overall? How are they spending that money? The legislature had allocated quite a bit of money, but there is a very, very strict timeline on how that has to be spent. We're going to be catching up with her on how she's managing that, and also just, her thoughts on the legislative session, her relationship with the governor. There's always plenty of things to talk about with Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke. So we hope you join us right back here on Wednesday at 10:30.
We'll see you then. Aloha.